Welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, because I love being repetitive all the time. Makes it easier on me, and I hope it makes it easier on the audience too, even though it's probably likely super annoying AF. But hey, never not be repetitive, right? Anyway, today's question for today's episode is, could you tell me which type would win in a fight? What an odd question. Is that going to be an ISFP or an ISTP? And also, if that would change depending on who started it, what it was over, drinking or sober, limited to fists or not, or any other variables that you find interesting. What an odd yet relevant question. So let's get down to it. So yeah, who would actually win in a fight? I would maintain every time it's probably going to be the ISTP. ISFPs are outcome focused. They're they're very static, whereas the ISTP is more dynamic. So the ISTP, just from a nature standpoint, would have the ability to be more dexterous, have a little bit more movement. Whereas an ISFP is concentrating on the outcome, gotta land that haymaker blow as much as they can. All about like trying to concentrate the force into one point of energy to hit it where it counts. And I guess that would make sense since their subconscious is literally a clone of Napoleon, and Napoleon is all about concentrating his forces or leading from the front, etc. within his strategy. But the ISTP still has an opportunity to actually rope-a-dope the ISFP and ultimately take the fight. Not only that, ISTPs are almost always, or at least usually, accomplished martial artists. Some of the best martial artists in the world. Hold on, I actually got a Jeet Kune Do. So Paul Vunak, for example. There's also Darren Levine. These gentlemen are ISTPs, even Chuck Norris is an ISTP. It's more likely that an ISTP would be trained and actually have some formal training, whereas an ISFP, not so much. I honestly don't really know or have even seen an ISFP who is involved in martial arts, except for like the occasional ISFP woman. Sometimes, like when I'm in class, I might see one or two over throughout the year in my Krav Maga class, for example, but it's just not common, whereas ISTPs are insanely common. In fact, one of my best instructors, his name is Steven, fantastic fellow, definitely an ISTP, and I love training Krav Maga under him. He is absolutely fantastic, and I'm very to have him. Also George, the ISFJ, but Steven always, because of his expert intuition trickster, he over-explains why. He over-explains like additional options and choices and what could actually happen in a fight, which is really great. He's not so stoic or focusing on the system entirely. He's actually able to define it a bit more. And even like, for example, if the ISTP was like drinking, that ESTJ would his ESTJ shadow would absolutely pummel the ESFJ shadow of the ISFP. The ISFP is really not going to win if it's just like base fists, and honestly the ISFP would be more likely to actually have a weapon on their person, be that a knife or a gun or something like that, whereas the ISTP, due to FE inferior, is not so likely to actually have a weapon, which too can be a thing. So and it's kind of interesting because when you're actually assessing threats using Jungian analytical psychology, some types are more likely to carry weapons, other types are less likely to carry weapons. ISTPs carrying weapons, it's just not really common with them. It's actually an uncommon thing. Whereas ISFPs, it is very common for them to carry weapons, very much. Very, very common. Same with INTJs. That's also very common. INFJs, not so much. ISTJs, it is a bit more common for them to carry weapons on their person. ESTJs, not so much. And I think it's the affiliative nature of the ESTJ and the affiliative nature of the ENFJ, subconscious versus shadow within the ISTP, that does that. But if you're just doing like drinking or sober and just regular fists, the ISTP is usually I would say at least 4 out of 5 times going to take the ISFP down. Really, absolutely. And the ISTP would probably fight a bit honorably until the ISFP starts fighting dirty. Then the ISTP is going to allow themselves to be dirty as a result. With the pirate-like wayfarer approach to fighting, ISFPs are likely to go to anything goes instead of actually, and they'll be anything goes probably at the start of the fight, whereas the ISTP would be a little bit honorable about the fight at the beginning, but then eventually they'll still overcome and still finish it. I mean, and in my experience in watching a bunch of fights and people fight, it's this is just my personal opinion because this is a really subjective question, but based on my life experience and everything that I've observed among these two types, absolutely the ISTP is going to win. Really, I mean, that FI demon, especially when they don't really care about themselves as much, they're willing to actually take a couple more hits than the ISFP would, and they're fast enough to actually do really nice counterattacks. Like, especially there's that one counterattack when someone throws a punch to you in Krav Maga, you do 360 defense, and then you move their fist that way, and then you're just palm heel striking right in their face, etc. Just a nice counterattack, counter striking basically. And ISTPs are amazing at counter striking, and they could just do it on the fly with super quick reaction time. Given that the ISFP is behind the scenes with the interaction style, which is informative responding outcome, that being behind the scenes, their reaction time is technically slower than an ISTP. So the ISTP is more dexterous, more dynamic, very fluid, open up to a lot of options. They can take a little bit more hits because they don't have an FI in their ego, because they don't care about themselves as much. And definitely, when the ISFP sets the tempo for the fight, as they usually do, because sometimes it's like blind rage, kind of like a bull seeing red, for example, the ISTP is going to respond and be able to take them down pretty easily. So that's just something to be aware of. It's in terms of like martial arts styles that I commonly see ISTPs getting involved in, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is number one. ISTPs seem to be in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like the most, and then like second most karate, and third most definitely Krav Maga for sure. But the thing is that ISTPs, like my chiropractor is actually a world karate champion, interestingly enough, and he's an ISTP. ISTPs and just martial arts just absolutely speaks to them, and I would also recommend ISTPs consider martial arts as a career because they're just that skilled, they're just that good. And especially since they're supervisor types to ENTPs, and ENTPs also traditionally are amazing martial artists, including, like, for example, Bruce Lee. He was a popular martial artist. But that's not to say that other types can't be amazing martial artists either. The founder of Krav Maga, he's an INTJ, Emil Lichtenfeld, so it just really depends, and a lot of the styles out there actually really reflect the founder. Like Jeet Kune Do is very ENTP oriented, Krav Maga is very INTJ, like Emil Lichtenfeld is, etc. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just seems to be like the ISTP martial arts style, etc. But yeah, and like I said, in terms of variables, the ISFP is likely to have a weapon on their person or procure a weapon on site, like a club or a chair or something, to fight against the ISTP. The ISTP is not likely to have a weapon, but that doesn't make them any less deadly, and they can quickly react in the moment and with a faster reaction time than an ISFP to finish the fight within 30 seconds to a minute. It absolutely basically would go down that way. And it's kind of interesting too, because I've noticed that when you psychoanalyze like people like getting involved in UFC fights and what type there is, you can kind of get an idea as to probably who's likely to win, and I wonder if that'll actually affect betting as a result, because some types just with their nature are just better at fighting than others, and that's always been fascinating. I think a good example of that would be like Conor McGregor being an ENFP. ENFPs, while decent at fighting, they're not the best. They're really not the best, and an ENFP would likely lose to an ISTP in the long run, for example. So there's just so many different variables to consider, and I understand that's why you're asking about the variables as a result. But either way, who would win in a fight? Typically, it'd be the ISTP for the reasons that are mentioned. So, anyway, hopefully this answered your question, and thanks for watching and listening, folks. And I'll see you guys tonight.